And we are back on Take Action News. This is Richard Eskow, and as we have promised you from the beginning, we're going to try to keep you informed on subjects that don't always get all the attention they deserve or the right kind of attention. And the topic now is Iran, and the guest is Stephen Miles, who is with Win Without War. Stephen, are you with us?
I am, yes. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having us on. And first, before we start, give us a minute about Win Without War. Tell us a little bit about your organization.
Yeah, certainly. So Win Without War is a coalition of about 36 national organizations, groups like MoveOn.org, Credo, a number of faith-based organizations. It was something that came together back in 2002 around the run-up to the Iraq War and stayed together through the years, working to bring an end to the war in Iraq, eventually taking on opposition to the war in Afghanistan, working to prevent a war with Iran, working to decrease our spending at the Pentagon, and a number of other national security priorities from a progressive perspective.
Terrific. And, well, it's good to know you're out there and staying on this topic. And I wanted to talk to you today because you are following these issues so closely about Iran. And I've followed the Iran situation fairly closely for a while. Now what we appear to have is, with the election of a new president in Iran, we seem to have a government that's more open to negotiating with us, and we seem to have some movement in that direction. And in return, we have an agreement in place that seems more of a kind of interim, let's keep talking agreement, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, between the United States and the Islamic government of Iran. And now we have a movement in the Senate to undermine that agreement. Could you tell us a little bit about what's going on from your perspective?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, the U.S. And the international partners in Iran have been having this confrontation for a number of years over the Iranian nuclear program. Obviously, the U.S. hostilities against kind of conflict with Iran goes back a number of years. We can go through the history, the coup that we helped instigate, the 1979 revolution, American hostages. But point being, through all that conflict and turmoil, we've come to a place today where we find the international community in the U.S. Having reached an agreement, as you said, with the Iranians about freezing and in some important ways rolling back their nuclear program. That interim agreement was reached back in November. It goes into effect on Monday, actually, January 20th. And the basic terms of that agreement lay out that we will freeze our sanctions and not add any new sanctions. We'll ease a tiny little bit of the existing sanctions. And in exchange, the Iranians will freeze their nuclear program where it is and make some important steps back. But what we see is that there's a number of folks in Congress who don't like this. In reality, it's a historic deal. It's the first time in over a decade we've made any progress on this issue. And so you've seen a number of efforts introduced in Congress to essentially sabotage diplomacy and see if they can't kill this deal before it ever really gets off the ground.
Well, we'll talk about that in a little more specifics, but let me tell you my perspective, which is that this seems to me to be an eminently reasonable deal from the Iranian side. That it seems, not everybody has to agree with me on this, but it seems to me they're saying, they do have some rights as a sovereign nation, whether we like it or not. They're saying we'll hold off on all of that just so that we can keep talking, and we're not demanding permanent agreements. Now, again, correct me if I'm wrong, we're just asking you to ease up a little bit on the sanctions in the meantime, so that if I'm one of the negotiators, let's say in Iran, I can go back to my folks and say, hey, all right, we're getting somewhere. And even that is being objected to. Is that a fair characterization in your thought?
Yeah, I think it is a fair characterization. I mean, what we have essentially is an interim agreement. It's an interim deal. We have an Iranian regime that was elected back earlier this year, in large part because the people of Iran are looking for some reform. They're looking for more pragmatic leaders. They wanted to get rid of folks like President Ahmadinejad, who I'm sure everyone remembers. And so they elected President Rouhani. He's not a radical reformer, but he's a pragmatist. And his goal that he stated during the campaign and since then is that he wants to deal with this issue so that they can ease some of the economic pressure that the U.S. and the West has imposed on Iran and help make the Iranian economy a little bit better. In exchange for that, they're willing to make some concessions. Reaching
why
a bigger.
would,
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, why would anyone, including a number of Democrats in this case, object to a deal like that?
There's a lot of different reasons. And I think different folks are objecting for different reasons. I think it's worth pointing out that the sanctions push that we're seeing in Congress right now is led by a Democrat, Senator Bob Menendez, but the bulk of the support, the vast majority of the 59 co-sponsors on the bill right now are Republicans. And I think, as Jon Stewart said on his show the other day, it's not surprising why Republicans are against this. They've been against everything this president's done, and it kind of wouldn't matter what the deal said. If President Obama was the one helping negotiate it, they would be against it. As for the Democrats, there's lots of reasons, and we can get into that speculation. But what's clear is why they're not doing it. And they're not objecting to the deal because it's what the American people want. The American public overwhelmingly supports the deal. And they're not objecting to the deal because they think that we can get a better diplomatic outcome. We can't. The President and the Secretary of State, John Kerry, who are the ones doing the negotiating, said this will undermine their negotiating position. So we know why they're not doing it. And we have a little lack of clarity onto why they are doing such a ill-fated effort.
Well, we could argue. I wouldn't put you in that spot, but I would imagine that there are certain voting blocs that they want to please, and that they're doing so at the expense of their own country's national security. I would have a very harsh judgment in that regard, and I guess I'm not asking you or your organization to endorse that point of view, but I certainly think that A, their actions are indefensible, and B, they need to be stopped. And if we can at least agree on that, what can people do to change this situation?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and actually, I will kind of go a little further than I went previously. I mean, there's a very powerful and organized force of groups that are lobbying on behalf of trying to kill this deal. Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has made it clear he doesn't support the deal. Groups that are in the U.S. that are very closely associated with him and his party, the Likud party, groups like AIPAC and others, have made it clear that they don't like this deal and that they're going all in on a lobbying campaign, talking to senators, flying folks into D.C., making it a real push to see this. And it's not a surprise to see that folks like Senator Menendez and Senator Mark Kirk of Illinois, who are two of the closest senators to AIPAC and other groups like that, are the ones behind this deal. So there's clearly a coordinated push by some of the most powerful lobbying forces in Washington. But what we're seeing is pushback from the American public. And I know you mentioned just now kind of what can we do about it. That's what we can do about it. The American public can make their voice heard in this debate. And the more they do that, the more the Senate's beginning to perk up and listen. And the Democrats are growing a little backbone and standing up for diplomacy.
Well, good, because I think there have been some misperceptions along the way, especially to a certain extent. Again, I'm not going to ask you to endorse what I say, but it certainly seems to me that the AIPAC lobby, for example, has managed to wrap itself in the mantle of, if you oppose us, you have ethnic bias or whatever. I think we've seen that breaking down. I think strategically it could be unwise for them. If people are well organized, it could be very unwise for them to push against a deal that the American people very much want and push for the continuation of warlike tensions in that reason. So is there any way your organization can help people get in touch with representatives or senators and communicate their opinion on this?
Yeah, absolutely. On our website, www.winwithoutwar.org, we have more information on this. We have ways to take action, action alerts, and that folks can use to send emails to Congress or send phone calls into Congress and have their voices heard. There's also, I would say, a number of other groups. There were 66 national organizations who signed a letter on this issue just earlier this week. So there's lots of groups, like I said, from Move On, Credo, Daily Kos, groups like J Street, other organizations that are working really hard and probably have action alerts in the inboxes of the people listening's email. And so whether it's at winwithoutwar.org or kind of at the group of choice for your listeners, there's lots of ways out there that folks can get engaged with their members of Congress. And then
we'll have to leave it at that. And Stephen Miles, thanks so much for being with us, and we will be right back on Take Action News.